from the Salvation Army National Headquarters, this is the Fight for Good podcast.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Fight for Good podcast. I'm your host, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Foley, broadcasting from our offices of the Salvation Army's National Headquarters here in Alexandria, Virginia, on a beautiful spring morning. And we're so glad that you're taking a few moments of your time to give us a listen today. Joining me, as always, is my right-hand man, my left-hand man, my left foot, my right foot, everything. He's a great guy, and I appreciate him so much. Our War Cry editorial director, Mr. Jeff McDonald. Good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Colonel Foley. Thank you for another episode that we can talk about our work, providing inspiration and information about the Salvation Army, and being an evangelical voice for the Army.
Well, gosh, that was like so formal. We're getting formal here. I was like, hey, how you doing?
Oh. Well, how's this? You know, you're right. It's springtime. Everything's blooming. And, man, we captured some of that on the cover of our May War Cry.
That's it. And we're here today to discuss the May issue, May 2021. And it has a beautiful, bright, spring-like cover. And we were having a little discussion before we started recording here about I just default naturally to landscapes. I just love landscapes, whether it's watercolors or photography or whatever. So I think Jeff, the staff, knows how to appease me now and then. The June issue cover, we'll talk about that when that comes out. That's a little different cover, and so the whole staff loves it, and I'm kind of like, I don't know, not so much, but I love you guys, so it's my parting gift to you. But we'll talk about that at a later podcast. Also with us, I cannot forget our illustrious producer, Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hello there.
You're always so more talkative on that podcast for the kids that we have launched a few months ago, and I'm hoping that you would just jump in more, just be more chatty with Jeff and I. But I have a feeling that when we talk, we kind of lull you to sleep. Is that true?
I just think you speak so eloquently that to me, to put in my jabber would be almost absurd sometimes. I would just ramble nonsense and ruin the flow.
Which is far for the case. Elizabeth, you're just a joy to work with, and we appreciate all that you're doing behind the scenes, keeping, managing our media, keeping the Salvation Army publications out and relevant, and it's just so great. Thank you for helping me and Jeff, two old men. We were talking about our grandsons before we got on, and you said you guys give off the grandpa vibe, I think is what
the cool
said.
Grandpa vibes.
The cool.
The ones that you want to hang out with.
There you go.
Well, we're so excited. We're so excited to hang out with our grandkids, but we're also so excited today for our listeners to be a part of us and for the opportunity for us to sit and jabber a little bit about the May issue of the War Cry. Jeff, this War Cry just kind of resonates with lots. It's just chock full of all kinds of different things that kind of connect. Let's kind of start, I guess, towards the beginning, because we have this section that we really hope that our listeners don't run over, but that they would kind of pay attention to it, because I know you're very intentional. We have a great story on page 11 in the frontline section. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
This was provided to us by Amy Hand. She's the director of media relations for the Army's Wisconsin Upper Michigan Division. And it's a story about Matthew, who, was a stable guy, had a family, but, went through some really tough times and found himself desperate, even sleeping in his car on Milwaukee's east side. to hear a knock on the window, and the police, told him to move on. Fortunately, he was in a homeless encampment, and his story of recovery is powerful, and it just shows, we talk about inequality these days, but really we're all equal in the sight of God. And here's this man who came to a new hope through Salvation Army services. So we were happy to hear from the Office of the Development Director in that Wisconsin and Upper Michigan division, requesting that we send a PDF of this article, and possibly they will order additional copies to distribute to their donors and those people in their community who are associated with the Army who can learn more about it. So that's really a powerful story, and it's replicated in so many ways by the Army throughout the country, throughout the world. This is just one example.
And it's interesting the last year of how the Army's assistance to humanity has risen to the attention of a lot of people. The financial trust has risen. The communities across America and across the world continue to turn to the Salvation Army. Both and all political parties look to the Army. They don't necessarily agree with maybe the ethos of our theology or whatever, but they certainly can't argue with what it is that we do. And I think here at National Publications, you just kind of highlighted something that, we want to continue to, it may be a cheesy thing, but we really want to salute the men and women, the officers, soldiers, employees, and volunteers of the Salvation Army throughout the United States that are doing a lot of stuff that goes unnoticed, especially in just caring for individuals like Matthew. And Jeff, he says something here at the end. I might not be alive if it weren't for coming here, and how precious each person, every person is on this planet in the eyes of God. And that article just kind of resonated with me with this is what it's about. This is the gospel. It's not about big church services. It's about one-on-one, the type of thing that we can do. We give an opportunity for somebody to have a transformed life.
Yeah, and our cover speaks to that. God has given us a new birth into a living hope, and the Army is true to that, policy of rebirth and regeneration and the new life that salvation that God has provided.
I have been thinking a lot too lately. I guess it's because I was really moved by the Academy Award-winning picture Nomadland about how sometimes on the face value we look at someone or we look at something and we kind of make judgments, and oftentimes we look at homeless people and we make judgments. We forget those individuals have a story. They had a mom, they had a dad, and they have families, and they have kin, and they have been on a journey. And what I love about our ministry in the Salvation Army is a ministry of compassion. It's overwhelming when you do this work day in and day out, trying to care for people. A lot of homeless have severe mental illness situations. Some of them are not just sweet and easy to work with. But you got to pull back a lot of those layers, and we commend the people in the Salvation Army West Corps in Milwaukee for taking the time to save this one gentleman. We know that God had used the means of the support in the community, and they used the hands and feet of the people at that corps, and of course the Holy Spirit was involved in transformation. But God bless this work, and I guess, Jeff, we just don't want people to be weary in doing good. Keep at it.
Yeah, and there's joy in it, and you're right, but there's also really hard work, and we hope that our communications can help people, grab a piece of solitude or a moment of reflection so that they can recharge their batteries. As you know, Colonel, how difficult that is when you're in frontline ministry with the Army.
Yeah, and again, that's why I prophetically continue to speak out to this organization and the workers in it. Have balance, have boundaries and make time for rest, make time for Sabbath so that you can keep at it, and again, the Apostle Paul reminds us not to become weary in doing good. The well, the wellness is so vital in so many different things. And it's amazing, Jeff, to think about where the Salvation Army is in the world. We have an article about the work officially opening in the country of Bulgaria. It's the 132nd country. I don't know. Is there like 200 and something countries in the world? And you think about it, the Salvation Army covers most of the world in unified in our work in helping others.
Yeah, and that's a good example of the indigenous kind of turning to the Army that takes place, and key individuals make it happen at the grassroots level, and then of course the Army hierarchy gets involved and supports. But it's really, it's hard to imagine the burning need sometimes that exists in places around the world where people are, don't have the benefit of education or, a good means of living, et cetera. It's hard to, really understand the desperation that people can be involved in sometimes. And that's the Army's right there responding.
One of the things, Jeff, I'm about to complete 39 years as an active officer here. And one of the things that keeps me motivated to do what it is I do as a Salvation Army officer is the effort, the strong effort to help humanity, that we don't take political sides, that we just zero in on the need. And we used to have these different slogans. Like one of them, when I was a young officer, was meet the need at the point of need. And we have a real brief article here on page 13. It kind of stresses the things that are currently like politically divisive for people, and people want to argue in the media and in the halls of the Capitol on the whole immigration thing. What the Army wants to do is make sure people stay alive and to be enabled. And we commend the work that's happening down on the Texas-Mexico border, especially the folks in El Paso, what they're doing at I think it's the McAllen Corps.
Right. Yeah. They're providing food and clothing and blankets, and the personal touch, especially the children, caught in that awful border controversy and difficult situations. So yeah, another example of the Army's presence.
I guess I would also be amiss to remind Salvationists that even when you're working with children, remember those children grow up and those children have solid memories. And I have been blessed to meet, grown adults over the years who have told me stories of what the Salvation Army did to help them and their family when they're children. Amazing sort of thing. So generation after generation, the help that the Salvation Army is providing across, racial lines, across country lines, is commendable.
Yeah, and our theme for this issue is the diversity, dealing with diversity, and the being one in Christ. And you say it well in your editorial. Over the years, my wife and I have had the privilege to work in diverse ministry settings that offered us tremendous multicultural experience. The variety of races, ages, languages, and cultures has enriched my life beyond measure. I can only hope that my life has done the same to those I have encountered. Of course, that's kind of a pressing issue these days, isn't it? When we're with identity politics and the tendency to, categorize people by certain racial, cultural stereotypes.
Yeah, we've had a lot of discussion offline about the subject and in our editorial team, how to wrestle with some of these issues, the racial division, the cancel culture, the nihilism that just seems to be rising more and more in our country. And I think for me, Jeff, is making sure that my apologetic is gospel based and I just keep leaning. I keep leaning to Jesus, and I keep leaning to the teachings of Jesus, and I keep leaning to Matthew 5, 6, and 7. I mean, if I didn't have any other scripture but the Sermon on the Mount, I think within that, it encapsulates everything that we need to do in our lives. And I feel very passionate about this because we have to get past all of our hurts, and we have to listen to each other. We have to appreciate each other. I was listening to somebody last week who was saying we've got to get past this agree to disagree sort of thing. Let's just focus on the things that we agree and move forward. And I think that's what we're trying to do with our works with the Salvation Army. We're not necessarily perfect with it always, but I think we're making a great attempt. And we are in these communities the ambassadors for reconciliation, and we need to continue to move in that. So we're greatly encouraged by what we see happening across the country. Also, we hope our readers pay attention to the Army at large in the United States. Jeff, there was back in the day when the war cry was produced every week. You were around for those days. When the war cry moved to being produced twice a month, now we only do 12 issues a year. But we've always told the story of what the Army is doing. And our editorial team kind of scours all sorts of sources to come up with the Army at large portion. There's just a great variety here of different things the Salvation Army is doing.
Right, and we try to make that a spotlight. We're not trying to be thorough or, all inclusive, but just give examples of the type of work the Army is doing here and abroad.
Well, and I'm looking on page 16, and I'm seeing one of my former students when I was out at the training college in the West, Captain Sam Lamar, receiving an award, being acknowledged for what he's doing and his wife is doing in Aurora during the pandemic. And I'm seeing a Kroc Center in Green Bay, what they're doing, how they're addressing the pandemic, and on and on it goes, all over the place, what we do with these disasters. So again, we salute and we encourage our readers to take a little bit of time on that. Jeff, we've been continuing our profiles. Major Jason Swain has done a great job. I think we're in our second year of doing this, aren't we?
Oh yeah, easily
that feature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and you'll recognize folks around national headquarters if you listen to the podcast and you take time to look at the magazine. We notice one of our favorites here, Sabrina Kaiser, is highlighted.
Director of Social Services for the Salvation Army USA's Western Territory at present.
She defected from NHQ and ran west, and smartly so. She ran to the. No, I can't say that. I'm supposed to plant my territorial flag at the door when I come into national headquarters, but yeah.
Well, the West is innovative, right? But she says in her profile, the Salvation Army in the U.S. has recognized its need for more intentional action in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there again, that topic rises. But yeah, she's doing a great job in the West, especially with the homeless initiative.
We would encourage our listeners to, send us your names of people that, are movers and shakers in your community that have a connection to the Salvation Army, whether they're a volunteer, whether they're an employee, whether they're a soldier, whether they're an officer. We really like to kind of explore this topic, and I hope as the magazine goes forward that we will continue with this unique little feature. It's kind of fun. Jeff, I always like kind of short things to read in other magazines. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, and this kind of has a People magazine feel to it a little bit. which people may like or dislike, but I just like this feature.
Yeah, you're right, Colonel. We have to really be conscious of the need to make text messaging simple, straightforward, brief, inclusive. That's the trend.
So we're going to move on here. We have a podcast with interview Michelle did with Jennie Lusko, and we have a couple of features here about a couple pages about her family and their ministry and her husband and her, and how they've reached out to the people of Montana, of all places. And I will remind you that Montana is in the Great Northwest Division, the Western Territory, Jeff. Is there anything that you want to say about this particular article?
She raises a couple of really interesting points that, the church at large is dealing with. Number one, in this day of remote access and people, an online church and mobility, she has found, Jennie Lusko and her husband have found that being rooted in one place is more effective to, provide services to the community and forming relationships. She also deals with the question of how do we deal with this environment where we have to be so careful not to offend, because people are ready to jump on any discussion with criticism and even canceling. So, and you talk about the gospel. I think the gospel is really a conspiracy, isn't it? It's a really goes against the grain of the world in so many ways. And the title of the magazine is The War Cry, and it is a war. Really, when you come down to it, we have to acknowledge that the spiritual foundations that God has created for the world are not fully revealed here, and are called, and He calls us to try to lay those foundations as best we can. So I thought those 2 points she made were interesting, and I'm sure you have thoughts on that, Colonel.
Well, I mean, there's so many different things. Well, on this article. This is like concise. It's a concise article about some of her key thoughts, but we do have a longer podcast. I think it's about 30, 40 minutes that you can listen to the full interview, and we would encourage you to say that. Of course, we know that the message of the gospel is offensive to those. The cross is offensive to those that are perishing. The Apostle Paul talks about that in Corinthians. But even though that the message of the cross may be offensive, it doesn't mean we, as followers of Jesus, need to be offensive in our approach with people. And that's, again, that ties back to what I love and respect, and why I stay, and why I joined the Salvation Army in the first place, was because of what it was doing to try to help humanity in the name of the Lord, and not shoving religion down people's throats, but telling people there is a way, and that way is through Jesus Christ, and introducing people to Christ. And I think, Jeff, in this day and age, we as Christians need to be very intentional of how we're presenting the gospel, and really what's a post-exilic kind of expression of faith right now.
Yeah. Right. And also that, the task is to let people know that the gospel is not a pejorative. It's not all about judgment, or condemnation.
No, it's not. To me, the gospel is, Jesus talks about in John 10 about the abundant life, and how the abundant life is not me daydreaming about floating around on a cloud on heaven. I mean, all these stereotypes of heaven sounds extremely boring to me. I can't wait to go there, but it hasn't been revealed to what all that is. I mean, it's beyond what we could ever imagine, right? And I think that's an incredible thing. But also, while we're here now, that's where we're supposed to find the sense of joy, which is not, joy doesn't mean this kind of unreal, slick, empty happiness, feeling of happiness all the time, but it's a deep sense of contentment of what it is we have, understanding the moments that we have, and being surrounded. And I get hit by these waves of gratitude and melancholy, I guess you call it. And maybe it's because I'm, getting a lot older in my life, and I realize that most of my life is behind me. It's not like I'm going to die tomorrow, but you know what I mean. It's sort of like, okay, let's make the most of this moment right now. Let's engage in the world. Let's continue to serve suffering humanity. Let's show the love of God by how we're responding, and we're not going to respond by standing on street corners and yelling at people that don't agree with us.
Yeah, yeah. So on that subject, the article by Captain Daniel Diagonwa, which is a reprint from The Word and Deed on reaching the new marginalized, it speaks right to that point that, the immigrants are the new marginalized in our country, in our world. And he's, offers encouraging ways to embrace them and to think more globally. As he says that he considers a multi-ethnic church core as a congregation in which the majority of the members tend to be open-minded and culturally responsive, and which provides culturally responsive worship and preaching. So that's another strong article on that subject.
Well, I can't help, and you guys are probably going to, put your finger in your mouth and slowly gag, but I'm just like, I'm thinking of another Hamilton lyric here.
Oh, good.
I'm like, Lafayette and Hamilton, they say, immigrants, we get the job done. And usually everybody claps and laughs in the audience at that point. And, this country was built on immigrants. It was built on people coming together, believing in democracy. And I know this good captain, he reached out with a great word of appreciation the other day to me personally for bringing this article, which was in Word and Deed, which is our theological journal. But we felt it was very important to get a little bit wider readership on this because we really think that this is an important thing that salvationists need to embrace and really understand, and to move forward with it. So we're grateful for the good Captain Dikanwa. I hope I said your name right, sir, for sharing with us, and continue to encourage him to write. Now, we're turning the page here, and we've got, again, our graphics team is amazing. They have our design team, Jeff. This I turn the page and I see the beauty of falling apart. Tell us a little bit about this article.
This is a great article by Lieutenant Stephanie Pavlakis about, really how do you attain true community, and from her own perspective, she has been a bit of a perfectionist. She admits she's probably quite a perfectionist, really, but she, came to a point where she still didn't feel like she measured up. She didn't feel like she quite knew what she was doing or fit in or all that. And I think we can all relate to those feelings. So she, acknowledges the need to drop pretenses, to be real with each other, to, in a church community, in a core community, to really take off the masks. And, she reinforces that idea in this really well-written article. And you're right, the graphics team, shout out to them. They understand,
my gosh,
our graphics team. You need to grasp the meaning that's being conveyed. Editorial and design are one, and when we pull it off, it's great.
We also like to make sure that we're having a diversity of expression, not that it's just not all PR or news or articles that are deep, but we have a nice poem called Softly, and we would encourage our listeners and our readers to think about, sending us your contributions when it comes to poetry or spoken word or great photography. Jeff, I think that's important. The War Cry has done that for decades, and that we continue to offer those kind of venues for people.
Yeah, it's funny. I talked to Robert Johnson up there in Massachusetts, an older gentleman who was very patient. He submitted this poem a long time ago, and we kind of delayed it. But he has been on the advisory board for the Army in his town. He has volunteered with the Army. Just a very humble kind of guy. So, you have to respect that kind of bedrock sentiment for people to do good and want to do good and to help the Army do its mission.
I do want to inform our listeners that my wife and I are currently under farewell orders. And so the next issue of the War Cry, the June 2021 issue of the War Cry, will be the last issue that my grubby little hands will be on, Jeff. But there's some significant changes in the internal organization of publications that has been made by administration. And my wife and I have been given marching orders to go back to our home territory. And Jeff, I'm so thrilled. Cindy has been given the new job to be the divisional commander of the Northwest Division. We call it the Great Northwest Division, which covers the entire state of Washington, northern Idaho, and most of Montana. And she will become the first married woman officer for that division. We also have my session mate, Major Nancy Dila, is a married woman officer. She's at DC in Portland. So hooray for gender equality. And I'm so proud that I'll be able to go and help her. And I get to do, I'm the divisional leader of officer development. And so that kind of opens up my pastoring and teaching and mentoring sort of role with the officers. And I see it extending into soldiers, employees, and whoever throughout that area. So it's exciting times and it's sad times. And we're going to have in the future here, we're going to have a kind of my last podcast will go into kind of a reflection and then looking forward. So this sort of thing is in transition. The War Cry will continue to be in capable hands. Our current peer editor, Captain Jamie Satterley, who will be a major this June. I keep reminding these kids that they're going to be old people real soon. She's going to be the director of publications. She'll continue to work very closely with you, Jeff. And there'll be some shifts with the Fight for Good podcast that we'll probably talk about as we go further on, as we get more knowledge about that. But my hat's off to you, good sir. For the May issue of the War Cry. We're very excited about it. And Elizabeth, thank you for the continued work. I think this is podcast number 80 or something like that. And this has been a lot of fun. But there you go.
Wonderful. And it sounds like a great fit for you, Colonel, out there with your new appointments for both you and Colonel Cindy. That's, sounds like an expansive geographical area, but also a lot of potential there. And boy, what a great opportunity for you to, work with people in that way, to share your knowledge and wisdom with officers.
Well, with that, that's going to conclude this episode of the Fight for Good podcast. We thank you for taking a few hours. We want you to make sure, if you haven't subscribed to the Fight for Good podcast and the Battle Line podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts at, please make sure that you're downloading and giving listen to our podcast, and also tell a friend. Be an ambassador for the Fight for Good podcast and also for the War Cry magazine. You can read the entire issue of the May 2021 issue of the War Cry at thewarcry.org. It will be up there for you, and you can also pick up a copy at your local Salvation Army unit. You also can subscribe at our website, $12 a year. Jeff, you have kept the cost of that in line. It's so great. But we also want to remind you that Peer Magazine is available too. Peer Magazine is our award-winning magazine for young people, the Z generation in particular. You can also follow all our social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Well, until next time, this has been the Fight for Good podcast. Bye for now.
Subscribe to Fight for Good wherever you listen to podcasts.